Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're talking about where agencies really are with AI. And I'm really chuffed to be talking to Becky McComb-Banks, Exec Director and founder of AI consulting and coaching firm Plane. For those who don't know me, I co-founded Spark AI. We also are AI consulting and coaching. We run training courses. And we also, every 6 months, we publish a market research report on AI in creative agencies. So some of those findings are weave into our conversation here as well. We're actually building up at the moment to do the next publication at the end of the summer. But Becky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. So yes, I'm an exec creative director from Adland Tech and worked in business for, golly, I'd say 20, but it might be a little bit more years. And yeah, coming out of running Meta's internal agency, decided to put my AI usage to knowledge to use, and set up my own little practice. So yes, we've been running every year now and consulting for agencies and brands directly, but also keeping one foot in the Adland camp, running a small agency and also consulting for agencies as a director or creative director.
Awesome. It's lovely, lovely having those foot in both camps. And it's interesting, we set up at a very similar time. We set up Spark at the beginning of 2024, also working with agencies, running training programs and transformation programs. So I think together we're going to kind of have like a pincer movement on what we've been observing.
We'll sort it all out, Emma. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Just in this 45-minute webinar. Cool. Let's start by just talking a bit about what we're both seeing. So I've been seeing like a real mix in how agencies are approaching AI. Some are going like really all in. Some are pivoting to become, positioning themselves as AI agencies, AI-led agencies, and others are still very hesitant. So I just wondered, have you seen similar trends to that?
Absolutely. I think there's no one way. And I think the thing that is consistent across everyone is everyone thinks they're behind everybody else. So everyone's very confused about the messaging, whether that's internally or externally. There is a mix, but there are more people actually using AI, from whether that's from the McKinsey report that basically they've gone 65% of people that they spoke to. This is State of the Nation, State of the AI Nation, their report from 2025. They said 65% of their respondents are now using Gen AI at least in one business function. And that was up from just 28% last year. But in agency land, we've still got some people who are really not adopting at all. So they're sort of, I call them in pre-phase. And I think that's partly driven because trying to sort out the ethical elements, the sustainability elements, all of the framework for actual application is holding those agencies back. And that's sort of, we sort of found that actually that's that pre-phase where the agencies are unaware, let's put it politely that way, that people are using AI. And then we had what also you add in what we call lone rangers or lone riders. So they're individuals. So it's not, again, an agency or business level that's implemented. And that constituted 52% of the people that we spoke to, which is actually quite a worrying place to be, because what it showed for us is that people are using AI. They already are, but lots of agencies or business are basically sort of caught frozen, going, I don't know how to implement it, so I'm just going to look slightly aside and just pretend that it's not happening, which I think, as you and I have just discussed previously, actually opens up a whole level of risk. So it's better to actually adopt it, but and actually take one step forward. And I'm sure we'll get to that. But yeah, that's certainly what we're seeing. Is this.
That's so interesting. And when you talk about the individuals, were those, because I'm seeing, some agencies have individuals within the agency that are really going for it, and they're kind of like AI person. Is that what you're referring to when you say individual, or are you more like about freelancers and
no, they are people within, but the difference that we sort of draw within sort of Plane's operation is that they're lone riders until it becomes team level trained. So until it becomes part of the brand or part of the agency, we sort of keep them as lone riders because they're not using tools that are paid for by their agency. They're not using, they've not been instructed on what's the appropriate or inappropriate task for them to use it on. So that's sort of why we keep them as this sort of lone riders sort of factor. It is that sort of maverick bit, and they are, they are sort of the AI adventurers in that. But I think it's the next stage when it comes into adoption is when it comes into sort of agency is now, or business is now looking fully at these people and going, and that's what you might be speaking about, is then they might be used as the evangelists about how to bring AI or where it might be appropriate. But there's a whole phase that sort of happens beforehand where these people are just doing it anyway because they're excited. They're not waiting for the okay from their businesses or agencies, and they're just doing it with their own work. And it sort of creates this dissonance of clients saying, we know AI is about and we want to be using it, and how do we get more efficient? Agencies also saying, we know it's about and we want to be using it, but we're not sure how to deploy it. But rather than waiting for either of those things to join up, people are just using it. So I think that's what a major takeout for anyone is really, your people are using it. So your first step should be audit, basically. Don't, make it a clean audit. So it's not, we're not going to tell you off, but you need to know what, where and how AI is being utilized in order for you to make any decision as to where you think it's appropriate or not.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And I think for leadership, that kind of place, and we see exactly the same thing, that often at the start of a journey, people are using it. It's just like, who's using it on what, where, like doing that audit is so important, just to put some basic guardrails in around like the potential risks they could be exposing the business to, clients to, unwittingly and unknowingly in a sort of non-blame way. And also like harnessing the opportunities that they're bringing and the innovations that they're finding and rippling that out. Yeah, and I think when we did our research, the last sort of big update we did of it was in March, and I think it's similar numbers to yours, actually, really consistent. So like we found that 20% of agencies are what we call pioneers, which is like typified by, really embedding AI into workflows and thinking about it in a very structured way about AI adoption in the agency, rolling out training for like everyone, not just certain team members, and thinking about, the much broader implications around what's your people strategy going forward, what's your kind of ongoing learning and development strategy, what's your pricing model strategy, what's your, what services you've been going to be innovating with, and all that stuff. And sorry, I thought someone was just coming into the room. I thought it was going to be my dog, but it's not. And then we found that like kind of 50% are kind of in that place that we just talked about, with a few sort of pioneers there, and 20% haven't touched an AI tool at all. So yeah, very similar. And before this call, I had a really quick ChatGPT deep research to see what the kind of like general business stats are and like how agencies compare. And I think the last government research was early 2025, so probably aligned. Was that sort of just under 20% of UK businesses report using some form of AI technology. So for me, that says that agencies are probably a little bit ahead of general if you took like the average of all businesses. And I think that makes total sense given what we do and what the AI technologies can do now. So that's a real opportunity, I think, for agencies that we're as a sector, we're ahead.
It is. I think it also reflects and this is the reason I started playing actually, was because all of the air seems to have been sucked into creative production, AI versus creativity. And basically, the challenge about whether it's Midjourney or Sora or Veo now, or Flow, any of those are basically purely focused on that production element, which, yes, is a part of what we do. But actually, the thing that annoyed me, and I sort of set up playing against it, was going, there's 80% of the work that goes up front that is actually the sorting out what that end piece even looks like. And that really is where we can make super gains using AI tools, that is sort of AI for innovation and AI for creativity, rather than the sort of just loggerheads of going, focused on that production end. So I think that might explain why agencies are using it, is because they've been dabbling around with the production end of things. And I think that also reflects, sort of sadly, where agency business models have shifted, because they've almost removed any value from creativity equaling ideas and innovation, and overloaded. They were almost giving that for free on top of a slightly fattened up version of production. And now they're reaping the consequences. We can see that sort of imbalance is really coming back in the terrible time that lots of agencies are having right now. So I think that might also explain partly why we're ahead of the system, but also because we are an industry that is being heavily affected. But also, as I said, just that myopic focus initially on that end phase, which meant everybody was leaping forward.
Yeah, and I think actually, we wrote out a few questions for this conversation before we started, and at the end, I'd put a note about talking about operating models and like what do we see for the future and that kind of stuff. But it is really interesting that the focus has been on like the end of the process. But actually, what AI is doing is everyone needs to now shift back to where the real. Why do people really hire agencies? They hire us for like our thinking and our collaboration and our, all the kind of innate stuff that we're great at as individuals. And that's where we need to put the value back now. And that's where, So, it's kind of very interesting. Anyway, we'll get to that.
Leaping around.
I know, but it's fascinating how the models change. Let's think about, I guess, the mindset and the culture of agencies that are adopting AI well, and what you're seeing, what I'm seeing, because I think that's one thing that really sets people apart. So like one thing we talk about a lot at Spark is kind of creative confidence, and AI can sometimes feel like a threat to that, like we alluded to. And have you seen any teams that have like moved from that kind of being maybe right at the start of adopting AI, and they're not in that pioneers group, they're kind of, maybe they've got a few super users who've taken it upon themselves, and where they've moved from some kind of fear to curiosity and then onwards, like, and sort of, really focused on their mindset?
Yeah, and I think it's with lots of the people that I've consulted with, or even on some of the D&AD courses that I do, there is such a variation, and it's solving this that lots of the sort of forward-thinking leaders have real trouble with. It's humans, but also I always think that those pioneers, those adventurers in AI, actually almost create a bigger gap from those sort of slightly people who are more fearful, or the AI averse kind of people, and they almost sort of wedge each other in different directions, because the more cascade that you hear, the further away you might feel if you haven't picked up a tool or looked at anything. I think the way that I've found it pays dividends is go back to for leaders in particular, it's go back to your brand vision, your mission. What have you set out with your own brand tone of voice? Come from there, and that should direct you, embed you, and give you the latitude to speak to people actually. This is what this means about how we will utilize AI. For example, one of the agencies I've been working with for about 6 months now, they have a positioning of no one cares, which is a way of just separating them. Basically, there's so much noise, no one cares about attention, no one cares about the end audience. It's all just become really dismissive, and that's why it's that loss of care, that loss of humanity, that actually separates the work that we do out. And that then gave us the framework for how we should implement AI within this agency, because because that then says, right, what do we care about? We care about the humans. So we care about everybody knowing everything. And you mentioned it before, Emma, that it's training everybody rather than just a few, because otherwise you create these internal gaps. You create an open playing field for having a go, not liking it, feeding it back, finding a different way. It's caring about where AI is implemented also, that actually are there areas that because of your brand you would never consider utilizing AI for. And I think then it makes it much more tangible to people, rather than going, here's a big red button, just press that and AI will begin. And I
Yeah, totally. And I think, we were talking earlier about how AI adds so much value, like at the early parts of the design process. And actually, I was talking to one agency the other day, and they have decided that literally until they get to production, they're not going to touch any AI. They don't bring laptops into the room in any of their meetings when they get together and to brainstorm, and it's not a thinking partner for those parts. It'll be interesting to see if that position ever evolves over the next few years, because a lot of agencies are completely the opposite way around at the moment, and I think that's a real outlier. But then that works with their own positioning. I think it's also something. There's also something, as well as like positioning and vision and all that stuff. It's like values, and I think ethical AI comes into that. And your point about, we've been talking about training everyone, and that's, to make sure there's no them and us, but it's also to make sure that we don't start using AI in a biased way in the business, because it's just the tech, it's just the development team using it, or it's just the, depending what kind of agency you are, or it's just the creative team, or, and making sure it's a real mix of backgrounds that input into what those AI workflows are. There's something.
It's keeping a general awareness across things, rather than, just if you maintain it, even within, I can't remember what they called themselves, even within like a sort of an inquiry team, almost a pilot team, that then almost creates more fear, because it feels like there's knowledge held. And I understand that you've got to do sort of a pilot exploration and look at your workflows and then adopt, but all of that has to be out in the open. It can't be sort of just information held by that team. So any way that you can communicate about what the team is doing, what they're actually looking at, and then the results from it, including where it didn't work at all, or it made things slightly more complicated, or fed back completely the wrong things. I think all of that just helps people understand that the tools and the technology is variable. It's not just one big thing. It isn't just going to come in and solve everything magically. So I think it's definitely being open, and, as you say, including as many people as possible, so that somebody feels able to sort of say, I'm uncomfortable with what's coming back. And also, as part of that ethics, it's on all of us that if we deploy AI in any system at all, that there are checks in place, and we have that from the moment we deploy it, of going, right, how do we validate whether it's working or not? And that has to be an ongoing process of checking the results that have come through, and finding, making sure you've got those trapdoors sort of built in, that if something does go awry, or something just is something you hoped was going to work in a workflow is actually not helping in a workflow, that you've got the agility in order to, at a checkpoint, be able to go, right, we're going to close that bit down. Here's what we've learned, and what we can now deploy, learning about that, is X or Y.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, at Spark, we run 3-month AI adoption programs, and that exactly what we run them, because you need those checkpoints, and you need to test and learn and do exactly what you're saying, and otherwise it can just be a bit of an amorphous just keep going. I think you mentioned
just a deploy and ignore that would be terrible.
You need to be super structured about it. Treat it like it's a change program, as a transformation program. It's not, you're saying earlier how it's, at heart, this is a people thing, not a tech thing. And your point about having a kind of a pilot group or a task force sort of hidden away in a room doing a thing, I think that's I think for me that's why there's a real opportunity for smaller independent agencies to be super agile with AI, because they don't need to, because bigger businesses perhaps they need to do it in that, they need to approach this in that way to make it manageable. They need some kind of task force that takes stuff off and tries it and then brings it back to the wider audience, and that can work. But also smaller businesses can, everyone can be involved, and you can have your bookkeeping team involved with the creative team, with the client services team, and you can join things up in a really agile way. So I think, I always see that as a huge opportunity for smaller agencies.
Definitely.
Let's have one thing that comes up a lot is around the kind of originality conversation. We've both spent, in different ways, we've both spent our careers in sort of around creative work. And do you think AI is genuinely expanding what's possible? Or are we kind of, or are we, you go on LinkedIn any day and there's, there'll be 20, maybe it's me because I'm immersed in AI, and our feeds might be very similar on LinkedIn.
We just down the same corridors. That's
exactly. But it's it's ruining creativity. Everything's generic. The age of mediocrity. All those kind of headlines everywhere. Do you think that's real?
I think there is a trance of this, but I think it's a yes or no question, because entirely, and all of the training that I do, whether it's with Plane or whether it's with D&OD, is it's a creative conversation. So it's not just ask a single question and expect the tool to come out with the answer, because that will be generic. It's coming from, well, depending on what model whether it's in-house or where it's been trained, but that will be the collation of many answers, and then basically trying to flatten it out into one that it believes, like a happy little, I always describe like a happy little puppy. It's desperately trying to please you, and so it'll try and bring you back something that it thinks will please you, but originality possibly not, because it's all just minor facets and reflections of stuff that has gone before, because that's what it's learned. However, it's on us not to leave it in that system and basically go, well, that's not how the tool works. It's not just, if we, I go back in the day of when Photoshop was done or whatever. If you just left it at the first time with Illustrator or Photoshop that you tried to create something and then saw what was rendered off the back of it, you would never step out at that first action and leave it where it is. And I think that's where people, because of the tools, come across as so confident, so pleasing, it sounds like it knows what it's doing, and basically goes, well, there you go, let's just go with that then. And that's entirely not, we are writing ourselves out of the conversation by doing it. It's on us to actually go, to use it as sort of, I use the analogy of a game of ping pong. I say that AI is the pong to your ping. And so basically you have to keep that game going, and you go through this creative conversation, which is basically a refinement cycle, a refinement 2 to 3 stages, and then a sort of a collaboration phase where you actually add in. I would never accept first pass on a response for be it a visualization or be it a written piece on any way. So whilst it is happening, because lots of people are using it as a first fix tool, I think that's underselling what the tool is doing, and definitely underselling us talented people who should be curating, applying our professional know-how, picking up bits, adding, now all the tools have got the memory function as well. You can go, I really liked what you said in chat 2 and chat 4. The rest is nonsense. Forget about that. But how do you think about those 2 bits? If I throw in that what I know about car brands is that it's got to be in a modular design, and we've always got to have X and Y and Z. Now that's me improving what the tool has done and utilizing my skills in the same way that I may do with a collaborative partner also. So yeah, I think we're letting ourselves down on many fronts, but I think you're also right in that there is a sea of mediocrity coming out, because many people are using AI for efficiency and not AI for creativity.
Oh, I completely agree. And to use it for creativity, you need to show your teams how to use it in the way you described, because it's not obvious. You don't just open it and you think, okay, I collaborate with it like a game of ping pong. In that way, it wants you to think that it's like one and done. It's got the answer. And
I really love it with I love Claude. It's always been my preferred. But I also love, because when you throw something in, rather than just giving you a whole new here's your new answer, it's no, they've plugged in its little it's not as egotistical as some other models, and so it deletes all the stuff that you've told it isn't right. And I love that, because then you can actually see, okay, it's listened to me, it's now removing all of those bits that I said. And I think that that's just a very human action, is going, no, you're right, on the whiteboard it's not that, let's go somewhere else. And I think that those little elements make working together more with an AI tool more approachable also.
Yeah, I think that's what makes Claude stand apart. It just those small design features that it's got really make a big difference. It gives you that confidence that it has picked up on what you said. Yeah. I think there's something around on the efficiency side and people using it just for efficiency. Yeah, I mean, it's like, LinkedIn again will make you think that it's all about efficiency. So, but an agency founder said something to me the other day about how for any efficiency that his team do find, that he is basically going to force them out of the office, into the environment, into museums, into galleries, into places that will inspire them away from their screens. And I think that's something that we all need to remember. If we do find there are some efficiency gains, then that is a massive win to fill our creative inspiration cups.
Top.
Sorry. Yeah.
Inspiration top.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the kind of leadership that is needed right now, and that to think more holistically than just, let's get a couple of subscriptions and let's train people how to use them. It's like, let's think about how this whole business operates now that this is in the world. And I think that's something that will make that agency stand out in terms of a great place to work as well, and all of that stuff.
You'd have to be careful though, because if your focus is still on efficiency as an agency, that will be picked up. Where you have to be driving creativity within that, rather than just being able to do things faster, or with fewer people, or however you're gaining those efficiencies. It always has to be in combination, certainly, with what are we doing with when we're more efficient? Why are we more? What's the benefit other than the fact that we're being squeezed as a business? So in order to, that might be an answer, is now we can match the in and the outs in a financial sense. But I just think that again, there needs to be another level build on that, of basically saying, right, not just going out for inspiration, because if internally you're only driving AI usage for efficiency, you're also missing that gap of actually, where's that inspiration you've just happened? How are you building that back in? That actually, how can you utilize your tools for creativity and for solving issues differently, rather than just solving issues faster?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, how do you use that if you do get some time? How does that come back in to basically do better work for your clients? And how do you get? It's not that it can't just be sort of free range. It needs to be targeted. Yeah, for sure. Maybe it's a good time to talk about the kind of commercial side of things then. We hear a lot from agencies. Well, we're starting to hear more and more that clients are starting to expect kind of either faster turnaround or like lower fees. And we're often helping agencies work out how to navigate those conversations, or ideally have a really clear position before those kind of conversations happen, so they can talk about how they work really confidently. And have you observed the same thing?
Yeah, I think that the clients that I sort of work with are huge enterprises, all the way down to sort of co-owner, sort of smaller, more local elements. And it's interesting that wider enterprises are feeling the pressure to apply or to show AI being used in an efficient manner, or the benefit of AI always equalizing efficiency. What we're working with them on a few different counts is to do basically saying, like I mentioned before, it's not just one big red button that you deploy, that actually in order to maintain the creativity and therefore the engagement of campaigns, you need a sliding scale as to what are your key messaging and key phases that you will retain full sort of creative, not just curation, but actually the creation element in, and what are those potentially lower down funnel messages that actually you might just allow the AI to mix up and do a jigsaw piecing on and utilize. So using AI intelligently, as opposed to just utilizing AI and expecting it to draw all those things back. And actually, we've been doing that with a large tech enterprise client and doing a 3-stage test, and one was entirely us in control. The next was just prepping it really ready to drop into the vending machine for the AI to sort of control, and then basically benchmarking results from that came out unsurprisingly going, we lost engagement in the second round, so actually how can we build that in, but in a way that still allows us to utilize the technology that's out there, but not at the cost of engagement and interest and all of those good things that you actually want.
Yeah, that's such an interesting example. I was wondering, I've been wondering whether there'll be a move further towards more in-house creative teams because of AI. And I wonder, you've got experience on both sides of the fence. And I wondered what your perspective was on that, or whether in fact the opposite, or whether that's sort of happened and it's kind of saturated the amount that it can be.
No, there is still a massive movement into brand and into in-house. That's partly because of the instability within agencies, and agencies are making vast redundancies left, right, and centre. So there's a lot of creative market right now. And the power of in-house is growing. It's no longer seen as just creating the lower tier elements. There are, whether it is Creative X at Meta, whether it's whether it's Draftline in Budweiser, they are creating great works in partnership. Whether it's at Lego, Emma Perkins there speaks about her agency operates, is internal for Lego, but they operate as a lead agency, so you still have other creative partners. I think that is still growing, and I think that will still grow. I think that will be partly driven, as I said, because of economic factors onto agencies. So there'll be more talent that's able to be taken in-house. I do think that it will be interesting, because the benefit, and this is where agencies should be standing back up and going, the benefit of being an agency and being outside of those corridors and walls is that you are outside of those corridors and walls. So it makes the conversations you have slightly less adherent to potentially leadership levels or those expectations that might come from when you're within a unit. It also means that you are facing different client challenges. So you're able to rise between one learning and another. And it also basically is you're able to operate at a speed that, quite frankly, particularly if you're looking at Meta or Google or TikTok or any of the large enterprises, they simply can't respond at. So it's how do you make it's getting value back into agencies. You're entirely right that a lot of the move is going back through, and a lot of that is production based. And again, that comes back to the conversation we had before about going, agencies were just fattening up that bit, and now we're looking at that imbalance. So we need it to redress and come back in and remind the world that agencies were here to do this. They were here to be not quite a mirror, but a mirror of reality with your brand applied to it, with extra thinking and a partner that can bring in different strategies, different learnings, and move at a rate that you probably and your team wouldn't be able to. So I think it's lots of those. It's a multifaceted thing, isn't it?
It is. But I think it's really important for agency leadership teams to be thinking about these sort of market dynamics, and some of it being driven by external factors, some of it being driven by AI. It's a whole range of things. But in terms of evolving positioning, evolving service offerings, evolving all of that, it's it's really it's more important than deciding which subscription to choose, which is the conversation that was probably the most asked question. What tool should I subscribe to? But actually, the bigger questions are exactly the kind of things we've just spoken about, I think.
Well, I think that's it. And, that's why coming back to your brand and coming back to your own individual take as a business on the world is far more important. And then that can inform your utilization of AI. It then can start to form the documentation that appears on your website, that gives you an opinion that then also you can share with clients, because clients are asking these questions about where are you using what tools are you using, where are you using them. So if you haven't even, or why are you using them, and if you haven't even thought about that internally, you're going to be a little bit stuck, and you'll sound a little bit fossilized if you start to say, well, we're not using them at all. But a little bit gung ho potentially if you're basically going, we're using all of them on everything, let's go. So I think it's finding, it always comes back to having your own opinion on the world and the world that you operate within.
And exactly. It's no different with AI. It just needs to be a sort of cascade of what your overall point of view on the world is. And I sometimes get the sense that agencies feel like they need to have this kind of all stitched up. They need to have AI figured out, but actually it's still really early days. It is early days, but you do need to start figuring it out, as we talked about it. You don't need to be on that journey. You don't need to have it sorted. None of us have it sorted, because it's not it's not kind of finished. It's not at a steady state, is it?
I think we're now very much in the trough of disillusionment in the adoption cycle.
Sure.
So I think that's the thing, and I think that's the thing I'd say, saying to people was, you can't stay on top of all of this. So don't feel that don't have anxiety because that you're that feeling. But I think always pull it back to those solid. What is solid? What gives us our view? What will enable us to say yes or no when tools appear that might be correct for our opinion on how we're going to utilize AI. Provide that is far more useful than necessarily saying to a client, I'm going to be using X, Y, and Z specifically on that. Them aligning with your reasons and motivations for utilizing technology might actually buy you a better relationship with the client than basically just listing out the 79 different subscriptions that you've got.
Definitely, because it's a much more comfortable place to be. That's probably why, if you're an independent agency, it's probably why you set up your agency, to get back to that sort of heart of it. And also, it's much more stabilizing for your team as well, if you're able to ground everything back into what the business is about. Absolutely. Rather than, I think that's, it's kind of that things are moving fast, but also slow at the same time. And if you can get back to that kind of why you exist and root it back in that, it's, I think it lowers the anxiety for everyone.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's a new thing and we're just taking it on because it's shiny. Let's go.
Exactly. Just looking at time, we've got about 5 or so minutes left. So, what should we do a bit of future gaming?
Of course.
I mean, we've touched a bit on this, but I think in a couple of years' time, AI has been around for years, and people that have been working in AI for 15 years, to see this as a continuation. But I think, the difference is how the the democratization of it, and it's a real step change, and we can only keep, even as you and I immersed in this every day, we can only see so much of what's happening. And like, what's your hope for what creative agencies will look like when it comes to what the changes that AI might make over the next couple of years? What's your hope, and how can we safeguard against the fears? And I think some of my fears I've probably voiced already, the mediocrity, but I don't think that will come from agencies. I think that will come from people that aren't professional in this area, just swamping the noise. And I've got a few thoughts. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, well, I think that I think how people are utilising it, I think for agencies, where I hope that they get to is back to remembering their foundations, which was back at what they were good at, was innovation, and finding different answers for questions that had now mostly probably gone before, with a slight nuance for brand or timings or whatever, but finding different ways to ask those questions and finding different answers to regular questions. That's always been an agency job. And that is the joy of this world, has always been turning up and discovering or coming up with something entirely new every single day, and seeing that come into life. And I think that we're moving there. I think the focus that we're hearing at the moment is this reluctance because of the initial overweighting of creative production and the panic of that actually has been caused within agency. I think it's then really securely stating the difference, and that we're actually meant to be out there pioneering new things. We're meant to be out there using AI for innovation. That was the whole session that I was running last week at the festival at D&AD, was basically, it's AI for innovation, and how do we use it as the grit in the system and the grit in the thinking. And I hope that agencies need to move into that position, because other areas are being eaten, and it's already being reflected in how tools are moving forward as well. If you think of how we were using the let's call them chatbots for wants of things, but the LLMs, even last year, it would be sort of assisting me, helping me do my work better, an individual task. And now we're moving more into, if you're thinking my pong to your ping sort of analogy, of collaboration, of actually where we're moving forward, of using that game together to see where we can get to new and exciting places. And then I think agencies alongside AI have to come back to finding breakthrough solutions to challenging problems that would have taken them years to achieve previously. And this echoes the aim that I've heard, that we'll have heard from Sam Altman and others on the line of, in the direction of AI travel. And I think that it is on agencies to be alongside that and going, right, if AI is now is heading towards wanting to be, where's our position with that innovation? How are we using it? That's sort of my aim, is agencies come back to being innovation engines and creativity engines, and not sort of reliant necessarily on the output quite so much.
Totally, and that's a really exciting place to be. I think it's why most of us got into this area. I wondered whether we're going to see sort of like more niching, or maybe niching back into what the sort of original foundations of the agency was, or sort of hyper specialization, and perhaps we'll see, I don't know if it'll be 2 years time or a bit longer, a bit shorter, but perhaps even stronger role for kind of handcrafted as well, a niche there too.
There'll be a real value, I think, put back on those elements, and there's already tools I'm coming across that are enabling makers and creators to own their own IP to address all of this element as well. I was chatting to other people about that last week. So those tools are coming through, but as you say, that handcrafted element is usually a backlash overlay of technology and things being too perfect in that world. I do think it'll be interesting to see how the big groups come through, because you know, the point of you going with an Omnicom or WPP, particularly if you look at WPP operating model, has been efficiency. Now, wow, golly, where are you leaving your agencies if that's all you're going to drive for? So how do you reinvest value in actually that process that you've now may have eroded slightly over your position, you know, currently?
I think that's going to be fascinating. Yeah. And sort of start some of those agencies that have started on that race to the bottom in some way, or race to margins, and how they overcome and reposition that. I think there's something also interesting around, you know, some jobs will be disrupted and there'll be less of some and more of others. And I think there's something interesting for agencies around, should we be taking the opportunity to train the people whose roles are most disrupted? Should we be training those people first in how to use AI? Should we be so that we can so that they can find those innovations that you were talking about, so that, you know, and I think there's, again, coming back to that ethical adoption over the next 2 years. Should we be more focusing on those roles than others, or in different ways? And I think there's kind of an opportunity there to find new ways of doing things.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, the best, if we're looking at output focus or production focus, the best users of Midjourney are ex-photographers. Because they know. So I think this is the flip that everyone needs to do, is it's only, utilize it as another tool, but don't just deploy it as a big red button that you press and then it comes out with the answer, because you are writing yourself out of the system. So absolutely everyone needs to be trained. I wouldn't necessarily, I suppose if you've got training budgets you need to divvy, then it would be those that are going to be most affected by the areas you have chosen as a business is appropriate for you to rely on. But I think it's like I was saying, it's that game of being that pong to the ping, that actually it's your overlay, it's your skills that actually will make the output better, whether that's written, whether it's visual, whether it's whatever, that able to pick up on the requirements and knowing, like I was saying with Midjourney, it's putting in the right lens and the right lighting system and everything else that actually suddenly lifts, elevates anything created into another worldie rather than just another picture. And I think that that's the confidence we need to be deploying. And interestingly, this was picked up in the Design Week report they did earlier in the year, that senior designers, when they adopted AI, were getting a lot more engaged with it. And that's partly because of the experience they've had. They're able to prompt into better situations, to evaluate things more quickly. And I think that's also something we need to be aware of, is those the brilliant minds, junior minds, hugely creative minds coming out of the system now won't have that experience of actually how does that work move from this to this? How does it come out as just an AI generated answer? How do I add that value into it? So I think it's understanding, as with everything, that your training will have to differ depending on the mindset and the experience of the people that you're speaking to.
Yeah, I think so. And being really cognizant of those people at different stages of their career. And I completely agree. I think those stats about more senior designers being able to, get better outputs is a reflection of broader stats across the population, isn't it? Kind of the better you are in your role, the more you get out of it. Yeah. So I'm going to start wrapping this up. I thought it might be quite nice to ask one last question about how do you stay sane in this world of AI, Becky? How do you sort of temper the AI noise and having to stay across it all? And I think
I think the realization, as I said, is that you just won't. So stop the anxiety about that and basically say there will be some brilliant things that would be entirely appropriate that I'll miss. Luckily, I have lots of good friends who will pass on lots of elements as well. I'm sure, the same.
Yeah.
I think it's first that acceptance. I think it's also That's what I've been talking about deploying with other agencies or brands, is working out what I think is appropriate, but also having my mind open enough that having to update all of these decks constantly with the new examples and show new utilizations. But again, that's entirely led by sort of my perspective on the world. So what's interesting to me might not be something that somebody else might show in those types of presentations. And I think it's the using your own personality as the tool to filter, because then people buy into you and the view that you prescribe, rather than necessarily expecting me to have an amazing view on what AI looks like over in finance, for enterprises. So I think that's the sanity check, is basically acceptance that you can't stay on top of everything, and the almost embracing the fact that what you find interesting is also what people who come to you either as a business or a consultant or as an independent, that's also why they're coming to you, because they find that resonates with them.
Yeah, completely. It's like getting over the FOMO. I think most of last year I had FOMO that I just, I should have known about that announcement or that new release or that new capability. And this year just focus. No, that's just gonna keep happening. It's not like, just read a few things, stick to a few handful of tools, learn how to use them really well. But keep your mind open, like you say. That's such good advice, because it's and for me, keep dog walking, keep painting, keep gardening, all that stuff helps a lot.
Don't live in AI land. That's not helpful to anyone.
It's not. Keep your own perspective. Fab. Well, Becky, thank you so much. It's been a really lovely conversation.
Thank you. It's been great.
We'll put any links that we've talked about in the show notes. I think I mentioned our market research report. I think, Becky, you got some research somewhere as well. So we'll put anything relevant in the show notes to this. But great. See everyone soon. Bye.